Hi, my name is Bethany, and today I want to talk to you about sensory seeking and sensory avoiding. This is something commonly seen in those with sensory processing issues. I do want to note that although many autistic people, if not most autistic people, do have issues with sensory processing issues are not exclusive to autism and are actually seen in a variety of conditions, including ADHD and OCD. Really quickly, before we get started, I thought it was appropriate to wear my softest hoodie when we're talking about sensory things. And this is the premium type hoodie on my Teespring with the design "That's so stimmy." Of course, it's not quite like that. I'm pulling it that way. But anyway, yeah, that's so stimmy. If you're interested in this design or any of my others on different things, you can go ahead and check out my merch store. It is linked in the description box below. So many people call having issues with sensory processing disorder. However, this is not an actual disorder as recognized by psychologists, as it is not listed in the DSM-5. However, it is a real thing and has obviously not only been talked about or experienced by many people, but it's also been shown happening in the brain in brain scans. When we're talking about sensory things, we're not just talking about your 5 main senses. We're also talking about things like interoception, proprioception, and vestibular sensations. Now, while I endeavor to have a video on each of those separately for the purposes of this video, interoception basically has to do with your internal body senses. Proprioception has to do with basically your body in space and its proximity and relation to other objects and stuff like that. And vestibular has to do with motion, balance, and coordination. That's a very basic explanation of those terms. So in the autism world, we often talk about stimming, which is a term derived from self-stimulatory behavior or stereotypy. Stimming is something often done by people to meet different sensory needs. Of course, this can also just be a fun, repetitive behavior with something that's pleasant sensory-wise. However, a lot of the time it is to meet some kind of sensory need. Now, these actions can look strange to people because people who are doing things that might seem odd as stimming are meeting a need that those who integrate sensory input just fine don't need to do, if that makes sense. So we are doing something like rocking or spinning or flapping our hands, whatever it is, to meet a need that people who don't have issues with sensory integration and processing don't have, because it all worked just fine. If they did have issues with it properly working, they might also find different ways to properly feed the need or give the right input, etc. In general, it seems that people are often put into 2 different categories, basically sensory seeking and sensory avoiding. Someone who is constantly wearing sunglasses and ear defenders and really needs to stay out of situations that cause bright lights and loud noises and all that kind of stuff would probably normally be considered to be sensory avoidant. On the other hand, those who love running into things and blaring loud music and crashing into stuff and breaking things and almost seem to immerse themselves into sensory experiences would be considered sensory seeking. Those who are sensory seeking are often considered to be hyposensitive to stimuli, while those who are sensory avoidant tend to be hypersensitive to stimuli. Despite everyone's desire to place people in particular camps, I imagine that most of us are actually a mix of both, depending on what stimuli or sense we're talking about. However, there are people who tend to be more of one than the other, etc. I wanted to share some commonly listed examples of sensory seeking and sensory avoiding behaviors. Hypersensitive kids are extremely reactive to sensory stimulation and can find it overwhelming. They may be unable to tolerate bright lights and loud noises like ambulance sirens, refuse to wear clothing because it feels scratchy or irritating even after cutting out all the tags and labels, or shoes because they feel too tight, Be distracted by background noises that others don't seem to hear. Be fearful of surprise touch. Avoid hugs and cuddling even with familiar adults. Be overly fearful of swings and playground equipment. Often have trouble understanding where their body is in relation to other objects or people, and bump into things and appear clumsy. Kids who sensory avoid may seem timid. They may be picky eaters or particular about the types of clothes they wear. A sensory avoider may not like being hugged or kissed, even by family, be startled and frightened by unexpected sounds and bright lights, hear background noises other people aren't able to detect, worry about being bumped in line or touched by other kids while playing, refuse to wear scratchy, tight, or otherwise uncomfortable clothes, be wary and avoidant of swings and other playground equipment that provides vestibular or proprioceptive input, have trouble knowing where their body is in relation to other people or objects, and prefer to be in quieter environments and avoid crowds. Hyposensitive kids are undersensitive, which makes them want to seek out more sensory stimulation. They may have a constant need to touch people or textures even when it's not socially acceptable, not understand personal space even when kids the same age are old enough to understand it, have an extremely high tolerance for pain, not understand their own strength, be very fidgety and unable to sit still, love jumping, bumping, and crashing activities, enjoy deep pressure like tight bear hugs, crave fast spinning and or intense movement, and love being tossed in the air and jumping on furniture and trampolines. They may stand too close when talking to others and not have a good sense of personal space, have an unusual tolerance for pain, walk with loud, heavy steps, enjoy jumping, hopping, and bumping and crashing into things and people, sometimes to the point of being unsafe, not know their own strength. Kids may rip paper when writing, break toys, or hurt others by accident. Prefer rough play on the playground, touch people and objects often, seek out or make loud noises, chew on shirt sleeves or collars and other non-food items. So for me personally, I tend to have a lot of sensory seeking behaviors. Things like spinning and rocking and tipping my head side to side and doing things like that, as well as pushing against stuff. Basically things that give vestibular and proprioceptive types of feedback tend to be my favorites. Deep pressure feels nice and comforting. However, I wouldn't say that overall or just completely that I'm hyposensitive. I am pretty sensitive to touch and do not really have a tolerance for pain at all. I do not do well with unexpected touch. And while I'm not great with bright lights over time, I think I have a higher tolerance for those than most people. But I also don't tend to visually stim very much, so I don't think that I have a very big issue integrating visual information and input. Sound for me is probably the easiest way for me to get overloaded. I definitely identify with the hearing sounds that other people don't tend to detect and kind of being bothered or distracted by them. I often am in need of headphones. In fact, when I need headphones and I don't have direct access to them, I will stim in other ways, almost like a way to override, or if something's loud, I might almost do a kind of echolalia to repeat the sound or maybe match the sound while it's going to, I think in that way it's more functional in trying to maybe override the sound to it, where it's something that I'm controlling, if that makes sense. Now, I did find it kind of odd that I would stim so much when I'm overloaded, especially with auditory input. And because like that doesn't seem to make sense, right? Like, why would you add more input or seek more input when you're already overloaded? Well, there's an interesting comment that understood.org made about people who tend to be sensory seekers, and this is what it says. Sensory input can also soothe an overloaded system and help kids feel more organized in their own bodies and in space. I found that particularly cool, just because it's one of those things where you're like, oh, that makes sense. Hey, that's me. And when I got my headphones in the situation in which I am referencing, it was like there was just like this calm and like I didn't need a stim anymore. And I think that definitely speaks to the regulation component of stimming that a lot of people, for whatever reason, can sometimes want to reject. While I tend to be sensitive to sound and even avoidant of it. Other times I use blaring loud music to deal with emotions and stuff like that. And sometimes even just for fun. But if it's just for fun, it's usually in very small quantities, because otherwise it starts getting almost like distorted, and then I'm done. Like I get a headache, my ears hurt, and I'm done. I think it's interesting because I feel like I learned about myself quite a bit because I would say that in general, I felt that I was more sensory avoidant, because I would avoid overstimulating situations if I could, and especially, again, things with lots of sound or smells. Despite feeling that I must be rather sensory avoidant, I'm actually quite a bit of a sensory seeker. However, it has to be on my terms. I have to control the motion and the movement. I have to control the sounds, because some sounds I do enjoy and can use to calm myself down in small doses in specific ways. I have to be in control of it though, or else it's not okay. When I get overwhelmed, I do tend to really lose coordination and start bumping into things, and just a lot of messiness kind of happens with my body and my abilities when it comes to like motor skills. While this is a trait listed under those who are more hypersensitive or sensory avoidant, this might also just be a symptom of being overloaded in general, and things just kind of stop working because things going on up here are just, they're getting a bit messy and things aren't working right. So understanding your or your loved one's sensory triggers or sensory sensitivities, basically sensory profile in general, things that are okay, things that are pleasant, things that are definitely a no-go, and things that help in general, super helpful in avoiding meltdowns. I tend to need access to headphones because I know that sound is an issue for me, and it will lead to a meltdown if we don't solve the problem. And now I can withstand a lot more than I think maybe a lot of people who are very sensory avoidant could, but having access to things that I know will help me is awesome. I have some people who know how to give me hugs that will be tight enough to give deep pressure. I also have a weighted blanket that I don't use all the time, but if I'm feeling like this weird, like anxious energy that I can't get it to stop and like nothing's helping, a lot of times using my weighted blanket will help. I've not used a weighted vest or jacket or anything before, but I'm kind of interested in trying one, honestly. But there are just a variety of things that people can use to help them get through situations that you just really can't live your life and avoid. I know someone who uses polarized glasses because they have light sensitivities that lead to migraines and stuff like that. So just knowing these things, having aids and sensory things available for people is really helpful in avoiding negative situations and overwhelm and overload and stuff like that. Issues with sensory processing is an area in which OT or occupational therapy can be extremely helpful. OTs can help you find out what you or your loved one's sensory profile is, what things might be more helpful, activities that can meet sensory needs, as well as give you tools and other ways to help regulate, to thrive outside of therapy, as well as, enjoying your OT time. So I hope that this video was interesting and somewhat informative for you. Do you have any of these main things that were listed? Like, can you identify mostly as a sensory seeker or a sensory avoidant person? And do you find yourself falling under one that you didn't expect? Like, I didn't really expect to be considered more of a sensory seeker. So let me know all of that in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you enjoy autism related content from me, you can go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I upload to this channel every Thursday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. Thank you to everyone who supports me here on YouTube as YouTube members, my patrons over on Patreon, and a special thank you to my Spaz tier patron, Philip Noah. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful week, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!